So it came to pass when Isaac was old and his eyes were dim to see, that he called Esau his older son, and he said to him, my son. And he said to him, here I am. And he said, behold, now I have grown old. I do not know the day of my death. So now sharpen your implements, your sword, and take your bow, and go forth to the field and hunt game for me, and make for me tasty food as I like, and bring them to me, and I will eat, in order that my soul will bless you before I die. Just go hunting, bring me food so I could eat and bless you. I can't bless you before I eat, which is another story. But Rebekah overheard when Isaac spoke to Esau his son, and Esau went to the field to hunt game, to bring it. And Rebekah said to Jacob her son, saying, behold, I have heard your father speaking to Esau, your brother, saying, bring me game and make me tasty foods, and I will eat, and I will bless you before the Lord, before my death. And now, my son, hearken to my voice, to what I am commanding you. Go now to the flock, and take for me from there 2 choice kids, and I will make them tasty foods for your father as he likes. So Esau has to go hunting, but Rebekah, she's got flock. So you save time, right? She can have quicker access to the meat. Okay. So verse 10, and you shall bring them to your father that he may eat it, in order that he bless you before his death. Jacob is not in love with this idea to trick his father. And Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man, whereas I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will touch me, and I will appear to him as a deceiver, and I will bring upon myself a curse and not a blessing. And his mother said to him, on me is your curse, my son. Only hearken to my voice and go, take them for me. So he went, and he took and he brought them to his mother, and his mother made tasty foods for his father as his father liked. And Rebekah took the costly garments of Esau, her elder son, which were with her in the house, and she dressed Jacob, her younger son. And the hides of the kid she put on his hands and on the smoothness of his neck. And she gave the tasty foods and the bread that she had made into the hand of Jacob, her son. And he came to his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am. With the deception we'll talk about later. Okay, we'll read a few more verses. Why not? You'll forgive me for a few more minutes. And Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I'm sorry, let's go back. Verse 18, and he came to his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am. Who are you, my son? Verse 19 is a very troubling verse. And Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you have spoken to me. Please rise, sit down, and eat of my game, so that your soul will bless me. And Isaac said to his son, how is it that you have found it so quickly, my son? And he said, because the Lord your God prepared it before me. And Isaac said to Jacob, please come closer, so that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not. He's suspicious. Why is he suspicious? The commentaries say, verse 20, all of a sudden, because Jacob says, because the Lord your God prepared it before me. Esau usually doesn't mention the Lord my God. That's what the Rashi says. In any case, so Jacob drew near to Isaac his father, and he felt him, and he said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like his hands of his brother Esau, and he blessed him. And he said, are you indeed my son Esau? And he said, I am. And he said, serve it to me that I may eat of the game of my son, so that my soul will bless you. And he served him, and he ate, and he brought him wine, and he drank. And his father Isaac said to him, please come closer. Okay, we're going to deal with the blessings later. Let's go to 30, verse 30. So in the art scroll, it's page 139. And it came to pass when Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and it came to pass, Jacob has just left his father Isaac's presence, that his brother Esau came in from his hunt. As soon as Jacob leaves, Esau comes back. And he too made tasty foods, and he brought them to his father. And he said to his father, let my father arise and eat of the game of his son, so that your soul will bless me. His father Isaac said to him, who are you? And he said, I am your son, your firstborn Esau. Verse 33 is this frightening verse. And Isaac shuddered a great shudder. And he said, who then is the one who hunted game and brought it to me? And I ate everything while you have not yet come. And I blessed him. He too shall be blessed. Very surprising phrase. He too shall be blessed. When Esau heard his father's words, he cried out in a great and bitter cry. And he said to his father, bless me too, my father. And he said, your brother came with cunning and took your blessing. And he said, is it for this reason that you named Jacob? For he has deceived me twice. He took my birthright, and behold, now he has taken my blessing. And he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? Isaac answered and said to Esau, behold, I made him a master over you. And I gave him all his brothers as servants. And I have sustained him with corn and wine. with really grain and wine. Okay. So for you then, what should I do, my son? Okay, they continue. At the end, he gives him a blessing. We'll read 3 more verses. And Esav said to his father, have you but one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father. And Esav raised his voice and wept. And his father Isaac answered and said to him, behold, your dwelling place shall be the fat places of the earth, and of the dew of the heavens from above. And you shall live by your sword, and you shall serve your brother. And it will be, when you grieve, that you will break his yoke off your neck. Esav hated Jacob because of the blessings that his father had blessed him. And Esav said to himself, let the days of the mourning of my father draw near, and I will kill my brother Jacob. Okay, we'll read about it. That's enough for right now. We'll have to go back because you need the big picture of the story. So that's the story. We have the deception. We have a lot to address. We have the communication or lack thereof between what's her name? Between Rebecca and Isaac, and it's just a strange story all around. Why couldn't they communicate? And some of these points we at least rose early, we brought up earlier, but I think now is the time to address them head on as much as possible. Okay. The truth is everything makes sense. So we just go to the next chapter. Okay.
A true teacher.
If anybody has, what's your biggest question on the story?
What's the biggest question?
What's your biggest question? What's the first thing that has to be addressed?
Why does Jacob deceive his father?
Why does Jacob deceive his father? Because he wants the blessings.
Why does
Why is Rebecca biased?
Why is Rebecca biased? Okay, that's a good question. You meant to ask me, not why did she deceive his father, but how could a moral person, presumably a moral person like Esau, like Jacob, how can you steal? Why you steal? I know, because you want the goods, right? But how? In other words, not how, not the technical question, but how is that moral? Like how did a moral person do something that seems to be immoral in that sense?
Well, there's a conflict. Honor thy father and thy mother.
Right.
He was told to do something by his mother.
Right.
And he listened to his mother.
Okay, so Steve says
that's too abstract. Huh?
no. Steve says you listen to your mother, but if your mother says to cheat your father, what do you do then? To me, it sounds like just be passive is better than being active. If there's a conflict between right, father says go rob the bank, mother says go rob the bank, father says don't. So if the underlying right, so it seems to me that if the underlying act is immoral, then you can't honor your parents. That's actually the law. The law is that you have to honor your parents unless they tell you something to go against the Torah. Right? That Rashi points this out. The commentaries, the Medrash says this, that one of the places where it talks about honoring your parents, I think in Kedoshim in Leviticus, it says honor your parents, and then it says keep Shabbat. So why are these ideas juxtaposed? So the idea is honor your parents, but you still have to follow the Torah. So even if your parents tell you not to listen to the Torah, you still have to listen to the Torah, not to your parents. You have to listen to your parents unless it's something in violation of the Torah. Right? I'm reading Leviticus chapter 19, verse 3. Every man, your mother and father shall you revere, and my Shabbats shall you observe. I am Hashem. It's the connection, Shabbat and honoring parents. Says Rashi. What does Rashi say? He juxtaposed the honoring of Shabbat to revering the father to teach you that even though the Torah says you have to honor your father, if your father says violate the Shabbat, don't listen to him, and so too regarding all other commandments. That's what the Rashi quotes in Teras Kainim, which is the Medrash. Talmud Yavam is Talmud Bava Metzia. Okay, so my mother told me to go against the Torah, maybe a little bit problematic. So these are two big questions. How does Jacob do it? How does Jacob do it is what Neil says. Steve said, I forgot. Didn't sleep enough last night. Oh, so you said that was the interpretation, but you also had a question, right? I forgot the question. You also had a question. To me, in addition to those points, again, the question is, how do you get into the story? How do you get into the story? To me, one of the most surprising things of the story is at the end. I stopped when I read it. As soon as Isaac's response to the deception is strange. First thing is he's frightened. What did they say? Shuddered? I don't know what they translate. Shuddered. What do they say here? Here in 33, they say Isaac trembled in a very great perplexity. Not a great translation, because charada is trembling. Isaac trembled in a very great trembling. He wasn't perplexed. Perplexed means it's like, oh, I have an intellectual quarry. Who was the one who tricked me? Right? He's frightened. He realizes a problem here. Right? So he's emotional. Right? He's trembling.
Is that the same word for hared?
Yeah. To that's the root. Hared is to be tremble, to be dreadful. In this case, before God. Haredim is before God, or here he's afraid of what happens here. And then he says in that same verse, and he says, where is the one who hunted game, brought it to me, and I partook of all when you had not yet come, and I blessed him. Indeed, he shall remain blessed. Gam baruch yeh. It's just a strange verse because he didn't calm down from the fright, right? He's frightened. Sounds like he's not happy. And then right after that, he says, oh, you know what? Let him be blessed. That's the most strangest thing. Imagine someone breaks into your house. You heard that there was a robbery, broke into your house, stole all your jewelry. And you hear it and you're frightened. And you say, no, let the thief keep it. It's just a strange response. Now, what's even stranger, just to elaborate on that point, so it's not just a half a phrase, to elaborate upon the point, what happens after Isaac hears about the deception? After this frightening verse, he's frightened, right? He's frightened. What happens after? I didn't read it because it's too far down, but I'm going to read it now. What happens? And if you would read, so it's funny how I said we have to read to the end of the story. So I said that you have to read to the end of the story. I said that the story is, I'm just going to find it inside. The story is, I said 46 verses, and I'm looking, and I said I would make it a little bit longer. But whoever broke whoever broke the chapters, which was not Jewish, did not break it that way. I would go a little further, but now I see why they broke it that way, because it's just so strange to figure out what's going on at the end of the story. So I'm going to the end I'm going to the beginning of, let's go to chapter 28. Sorry, I'm jumping around here. It's just a big story, so you have to really get now I'm going to read 28. I guarantee you that, the kids play this game that they, you start a story and someone else has to finish your story. You ever played it when you were kids? No? Birthday parties, start a story and then somebody else has to finish the story. That's what they did in the olden days before they had technology to keep us busy. And we had no TVs, so that's what you did. In any case, okay, you ready for the story? I'm going to read an innocent story. It happens to be right after the story we just read. Isaac called Jacob and blessed him. And he commanded him and said to him, you shall not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take for yourself from there a wife of the daughters, I didn't share the screen, of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. And may the Almighty God bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, and you shall become an assembly of peoples. And may he give you the blessing of Abraham to you and to your seed with you, that you may inherit the land of your sojournings, which God gave to Abraham. And Isaac sent Jacob, and he went to Padan Aram, to Laban, the son of Bethuel the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, the mother of Jacob and Esav. Now, in a million years, I would not expect this to be the conclusion of the story.
Right. But there's a very good reason for that from one point of view.
Go ahead.
Just like, and this is just one point of view, just like Jacob terribly deceived his father in a very deceptive way. Isaac says, okay, you think you're a little trickster? I'm going to send you to the big trickster.
But the blessing, so you say you sent him away, or you saying he's punishing him?
He's punishing him by
Okay.
sending him to Laban because he knows that Laban is an evil person.
So I would agree with you. I would push back I would agree with you. I would push back on that too, because it's really Rebecca's idea, and it cannot be that Rebecca is putting this forth because to punish her son. Rebecca's telling him to go away because she's afraid Esav may kill him. But let's put that aside. Let's assume that that's the case. Let's assume that sending him to Laban is quote unquote the punishment, which it does turn out to be that way. We discussed this in the past, that's where he's deceived by Laban and he's stuck there for 20 years. Okay, let's say I agree with you on that point. But what I cannot agree with you is these unbelievable blessings. If you compare these blessings to the blessings he blessed them before, these are greater. God should give you the blessing of Abraham. God should give you the land.
So I'll
This is the point. Before we get to the answer, let's let the question settle here. What I'm trying to say here is that it's unthinkable that it's not unthinkable. I would never expect this. I would never finish the story this way. It just doesn't make any sense. He's deceived. He's frightened. Isaac, and it's real. Don't tell me he knew about this. It's real. Isaac is trembling, a great trembling. It wasn't a show. He's really shaken. It's clearly shaken. There's no other way to read the verse. And then so quickly he says, "Let the guy be blessed." And he knows it's either Jacob or Esau. It's not like it's somebody else, not like a third cousin. In the beginning, when he touches him, he says, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." He knows it's one or the other, right? Okay, fine. So he knows, and he says right away, "Gam Baruch Yeh." And then, like I said, in the Torah, in the English, in the division of the chapters, it's a separate chapter. It's a new chapter. In the Torah, it's the same paragraph. The same paragraph. He didn't even have time to calm down or forget about it. Say he was senile. He forgot. He wasn't senile, but that's another story. We'll prove that in a moment. But the point is, how do you get this transformation? How is he blessing someone who just tricked him in the most unethical way? It's just mind-boggling. So that's not the greatest question of the story, but to me, it's the question that will help us see a deeper layer of the story. So that's why I'm raising this question right now. Go ahead, Neil.
No, I was just going to say the other thing that comes to mind is just the way that God jolted Abraham at the Akedah.
Yeah.
Jacob jolted Isaac in this story, and he needed that jolt.
And how was he jolted? You mean by sending him away?
Jolted?
No. Oh, Isaac was jolted.
Isaac was jolted. Abraham was jolted. So
right. Oh, so this is sort of his test.
It was a test, but it was kind of like to take him to a higher stage. Isaac just didn't realize it, and Rebecca did, that Jacob is the promised one.
Oh, okay. So you're going to say that that's very nice. But you're telling me is that when Isaac, so you're answering my question. My question was, how was there a transformation so quickly? He's frightened. He's trembled. Now, what was he trembled about? We're not sure. So the simple reading is he's frightened that he meant to bless Esau and someone who tricked him. But what Neil is saying, but then the question is, so why does he say, Gam Baruch Yeh, let him be blessed? Let Jacob be blessed. And then later he blesses Jacob like crazy, even more than he did earlier. So what Neil is saying is very interesting. Neil is saying he's frightened that he realized, because of the turn of events, whatever that is, maybe we'll add something in a minute, he's frightened that he realized that he intended to bless the wrong son. I think that's what you're telling me.
And he was kind of seduced by by Esau's ability to provide meat that's very tasty.
Right. So he's frightened. He's frightened about his bad judgment. How could I make such a mistake? Steve doesn't like this. Go ahead, Steve.
No, it's not kind of like that. Just take another component of the verse.
Yeah.
Which I find interesting is that my soul was at you.
Oh, so we'll talk about that. Yeah, go ahead.
That's another dynamic.
Yeah. We'll address that in a minute. Yeah.
As opposed to just verbalizing.
Right. He's investing himself. It's not just a technical thing. He's connection. He has a real deep soul connection to Esau. Yeah, clearly.
And there are many problems to the story, which we couldn't go through, but
not solve. We'll address.
Right. When Rebecca tells Jacob to deceive your father, he doesn't say, "No, I won't."
Right.
So,
he doesn't say I won't. He says I'm going to get caught.
But he doesn't say no. It's the wrong thing to do.
Right. He also does. Oh, his objection is not.
Right.
Imagine someone tells me this. You come to me and say, "Rob a bank." I say I can't. I'm going to get caught. That's not what I should say.
You say there's too many guards at the door.
No, he said my father made test me. Say it. It's just the wrong thing to do, right? So that's another problem. That's
Isn't
another
there
problem.
also a thought? I didn't read it, but Isaac doesn't really want to bless either son, but he wants to bless the blend of the sons.
Oh, so that's already the solutions. So that's already getting into the solutions. But we want to stay with the problems for a minute.
Okay.
Let me stay with the problems for a minute.
Doesn't Isaac and Rebecca talk to each other?
That was another problem, the communication. The lack thereof, there's no communication. If Rebecca wants to speak to her husband, there are easier ways to get the blessing shifted than having one son telling one son to trick his father out of the other son. You have a conversation. So that's a problem. That's one of the problems of the story. Now,
Don't they sleep in the same bed at night?
oh, you would assume so. I mean, yeah, I mean, why not? Yeah, there's no other wives. Yeah.
Do you think maybe the possibility that Isaac and Rebekah had colluded against Esau?
They clearly have. That's not a possibility. That's the facts. The facts speak for themselves. The question is, what do we do with a story like this other than saying, okay, it's just an immoral story? We have a problem with that because let me be very clear here. I have to display my biases. As I speak for myself, I'm going to speak for myself and for the about 3,000 years of classic commentary. We're going to try to defend Isaac. Jacob, because he's our great grandfather. So we're going to try to defend him. Now, we're not going to defend him completely because we discussed this in the past, that there are rabbinic sources that imply that this was less than, this was not that the result wasn't desired. Jacob should have got the blessings, but the way it was done was wrong. And they say there were consequences. And we talked about this, there were consequences in Jacob's personal life. That he was deceived later, as we will see in a moment. Next parsha, he's deceived. Neil alluded to it. He's deceived by Lavan, and in general, he had a very difficult life. So he was deceived by his children when his children sell Joseph, his favorite son, and they trick him. And they trick him with they take Joseph's tunic and dip it into blood of goats, and they say, "Haker na, recognize, is this your son's garment or not?" Rashi says that, oops, he tricked his father with goats because his mother sent him two goat kids, and therefore he was deceived. So there's enough rabbinic literature to see that Jacob is punished for the deception, not just Jacob, but also Jacob's descendants. Like I said, there's at least one medrash that talks about it, probably more that talk about how that phrase, the phrase that Jacob cries, a deep, very powerful cry, is the same cry that Mordechai cries when he hears the decree of the annihilation of the Jewish people, the genocide of the Jewish people in Shushan, in the times of Purim, the Purim story. So the Medrash makes that connection. So again, showing not just Jacob personally is quote unquote punished for this deception, but also the Jewish people, his descendants. Having said that, and having said the fact that we say this was less than perfect, obviously, you have 3,000 years of scholarship and defending Jacob. So we'll defend. I'm not saying I'm going to get into defending Jacob. What I really want to start with, unless anyone wants to bring up any other questions, because right now we're in the question mode, I really want to start with it's not so much, I want to start with the point, what was the frame of mind of Isaac and Rebekah? Were they in agreement? Was it a disagreement? Was it a lack of communication? What is this? What their philosophies, how their perspectives differ from each other? Then we'll deal with the actual story and the actual deception. But again, we're not here to solve problems. We're just here to raise the problems and address them and talk about them, solve them. That you're going to have to go to a different Zoom if you want everything to be solved and everything to be neat. That you're going to have to go to a different Zoom. Go ahead, Bob.
Good morning, Rabbi. Just to amplify on your just last point there, there is nothing neat and simple about the Torah. I mean, there is going from point A to point B, but with the animal soul and the spiritual soul, I think the key is that there's a zigzag motion from A to B. And it's the complexity of that zigzags that really the depth of the story comes out. And I think this is just one more illustration of that premise. Yeah,
very well said. Yeah. In other words, the simple answer is not what we're looking for. That's not where the depth lies. Okay. Very good, Bob. Thank you. Okay, if anybody else wants to raise any questions or points, please do, because like I said, difficult story, no easy solutions, but we want to hear what people want to dwell on, and then we'll see where we go. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. I actually had a question from the mother's standpoint. How did Rebecca come up with the solution, considering so she probably knew a lot about family interactions and what she cannot do by directly talking to her husband. So what can we learn from her? That's my question.
Okay.
How to resolve family conflicts, kind of not taking the straight route because that may not work. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, listen, this is a very difficult point. In other words, at the end of the day, we like to think that okay, we'll have to address that. We're going to address that, Rebecca. What's the best way forward when you don't have okay, we'll have to address that. I'm not saying we'll have the answer. I'm not saying we'll have the answer. It's morally troubling because we like to think that the end does not justify the means, right? That we like to think that the end doesn't justify the means. Even if you want a moral result, you have to take the moral road. You can't take an immoral road to take the moral to get to a moral result. But maybe that's not 100% the case, which is opening up all kinds of problematic scenarios. Well, let's see where we go with this. But hang on to that point. It's clearly we want to get to Rebecca. Clearly feels like this is the way to do it. This is her result. She understands that this is right. She doesn't mind the curse of Isaac, right? She said, "Like if there'll be a curse, let it be upon me." She's taking a spiritual risk, or taking a risk, take a curse from Isaac. She doesn't care because she feels this is the right thing. So she's clearly seems to be doing something. If you ask Rebecca, are you doing something wrong? At least from the simple interpretation, some people disagree, but from the simple interpretation, yes, she's doing something wrong because she's sacrificing for the greater good at the end. Whether we like that or not is another story, but that seems to be her perspective. And sometimes you have the result, you're going to do the result, it's a good result. The way there may not be 100% moral. She feels this is the right way to go because there are no better options. Why there aren't any better options? That's a good question. Like, why don't you speak to her, speak to Isaac? So we're going to have to address that. But I want to stop.
Can be also connected to the end of the story when at the end Isaac realizes that actually he wanted to bless that son.
Okay, so
she probably kind of sensed that.
So you're saying that ultimately she knew. Oh, okay, this is only a woman could say this. I would never be able to come up with this. You're saying that she knew that Isaac will be happy at the end. Because I don't know, I was surprised. I read chapter 28 that Isaac is totally fine blessing Jacob. I was surprised. Vicky says she's not surprised. Rebecca would not be surprised at this result. She understood right away that this is what the father wants. And my mother's like that. In other words, sometimes, the kid thinks he knows what he wants. And the mother has intuition, or the woman has intuition, says, you think that's what you want, but you're not that good at predicting what you want anyway. Because that's what the science says. Certainly the psychologists understand that people have no idea what makes them happy. There's what's his name, Gilbert, I think, from Harvard, Yale or Harvard. I think Harvard. His son used to live in Greenwich, and he wrote this whole book about joy, about happiness. And his point is that people are very bad predictors of what makes them happy. Right? We think this makes us happy. It doesn't. They do the studies. Other things make you happy. So Vicky reads this verse, and she says, "Menachem, why are you surprised at chapter 28? Obviously, Rebecca only did this because she knew that Jacob would be happy at the end." I like that interpretation. Thank you. That's good. I like that.
It also connects Rebecca back to Lavan in a very
Yes,
unflattering way.
yes, very unflattering way that Rebecca is using deception, just like her brother Lavan uses deception, and the deception doesn't come from Jacob. Jacob is Ishtam. He's an innocent man. Rashi says Tam complete. Rashi says is gullible. Rashi says anyone. When the verse says earlier, Yaakov Ishtam, Yaakov is a complete person, sincere person. Rashi says something very funny. Anyone who's not sharp to deceive is called Tam. So modern English, he's gullible. And not just gullible, not this gullible. He's not capable of running a deception.
But he deceives Lavan at the end.
The deception is he runs away.
No, the sheep.
Oh, the sheep. Okay. The question is how much of
spotted.
the deception? Yeah, he learns it. There's no question that he learns. His life circumstances make him much more sharp than he was in the beginning. Okay, so let's try to stay focused here. What are our big questions? We have the moral question of how he deceives. We have the question, we have the question of why he doesn't communicate, why Rebecca does not communicate with Isaac. We have the question of how this transformation comes so quickly. Isaac, who was frightened, all of a sudden decides to bless Jacob again and again. Vicky's point is that Rebecca sensed that would happen, but it doesn't yet explain why that would happen. What are the other questions? That's it. I think
We
that's
also
the
didn't ask
questions.
the question, which I think is very important. Why now?
Why the blessing now?
Yeah, I mean, why does he feel the need to give?
Yeah.
This moment?
So-
He's not on his deathbed.
He's not on his deathbed, but Rashi addresses that. Rashi says the verse starts "Vayiki zaken Yitzchak" when he gets old. Now, how do you define old for someone who died at 180? And here he's not 180; he's much younger. But I think it means he was 120. Rashi has his whole count. I think he must have been 122. Rashi says because he came within 5 years of the time of his mother passed away, so he started thinking about mortality. I think that's what Rashi says. But the verse says "Vayiki zaken Yitzchak" when Isaac becomes old. Yeah, Rashi says like this. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, who says this? Rashi quotes Amar Rabbi Shua ben Karcha. Rabbi Shua ben Karcha says if a person comes within 5 years to the time of the parents passing away, he should be worried, concerned. Yitzchak was at that point 123. He said maybe my mother passed away at 127. I have to be worried. The 5 years before his mother passed away. That's the math. You want to do the math? It's 123. He lives to 180, so he's not on his deathbed. But he's a little concerned. That's what Rashi says.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
The first mitzvah that Moshe Rabbeinu got was to keep a calendar, right? I was always curious, how did they figure the years?
Yeah. So you're addressing the question of the years in Genesis. The years in Genesis seems to be that's a broader discussion. How could they live so long? He's living 180. He's living 107. Abraham is 175. So what does that mean? Okay. Yeah. So the exact calendar that we have today was established by later on in Egypt, but the assumption is that they're doing some sort of calendar, if not the lunar, then the solar. They're not. It would be strange to say that at this point in the game they're counting with a completely different way of counting. Some people do say that, and that's how they explain how in the beginning of Genesis people are living hundreds of years, right? They say, well, maybe those years are shorter. So that's a broader discussion. I don't know the short answer, but it was technical. But without getting into the numbers, Neil's question is why now? The answer is because it comes within a few years of his mother's passing, and therefore he thinks about his mortality. I think that's psychologically sound, right? Even if a person is going to live longer, that would make an impression on a person, right?
Well, his eyes would.
His eyes were dim, but he wasn't that old. The verse says he was old. He wasn't that old. And the evidence is, in the reality, there are not many stories. He's off the scene. He's not here anymore. But if you follow the Torah's own math, he has many more decades to live. So Neil's question is in the place. Why now? And the answer is because he reaches the point of where his mother died. His mother died relatively young, 127. But I'm saying in comparisons to her husband who lived to 175 and her son lived 180. Jacob lived 127. So Jacob. The bottom line is, I think it's psychologically sound to say, yes, I'm not old, I'm not super old, but I'm within the mortality of my mother. So I'm thinking about mortality. I think that makes sense. Okay. So I want to start from an indirect point. It's not going to explain the deception, but I think it gives a insight into the story. And the big question is, was there indeed a disagreement between, in other words, what was the difference in perspective between Isaac and Rebecca? So I'm going to start with an interpretation that I don't accept, but it's still very nice. Not my favorite, but then I'll give my preferred interpretation from the mystical perspective. But the reason why I'm starting with the one that's not my favorite, first of all, because it's entertaining, and second of all, because the verses that first interpretation, the proofs are actually pretty good. The proofs are pretty good, so we'll start from there, be easier to get into it. Again, not my preferred interpretation, but you can take it or leave it. So the first interpretation about this question of the difference between Rebecca and Isaac is, the first interpretation is that this whole story is one big misunderstanding. How so? Isaac never intended to bless Esav with a spiritual blessing that he should be the heir of Abraham, that he should carry the legacy of Abraham and get the blessings of Abraham. Isaac never intended to do that. Isaac intended to give Esav blessings of material wealth. You look at the blessings that which we skipped over. What does he bless? What does he bless the person who he thinks is Esav? Mitala Shamayim, you should have the dew from the heavens. Shmane haaretz, the fat of the earth. Much grain and wine. Nations should serve you. The other nations should bow to you. The brothers of your mother should bow to you. You should be a gvir, you should be a ruler over. So that's all. That's the two phrases. All physical, not one spiritual blessing. So in reality, says this perspective, Isaac never intended to give Esav any spiritual blessing, just a physical blessing. And that's why not my biggest problem. The problem I highlighted, when he sends him off at the end of the story, he says, gives him unbelievable blessings. May God give you the blessing of Abraham. May he promise you the land, may he give you this land. How could he give additional blessings to the person who just deceived him? So the point here is, so forget putting that question aside, you see that when he wants to give a spiritual blessing, the blessing of Abraham, he says the blessing of Abraham, right? So when he knows it's Jacob, he gives him additional blessing. He says, he should give you the blessing of Abraham. And he says to you and to your descendants, that you should inherit the land that you live in, which God gave Abraham. He's giving him the blessing of Abraham and the land of Israel. So what they say is, Isaac intended to give both two blessings. One to Esav, just spiritual, physical might and physical prosperity. And one to Jacob, which is the blessing of Abraham and the land of Israel. That was the intention. Rebecca misunderstood the whole story. Rebecca panicked. She sees that Isaac wants to bless Esav. She assumes she wants to bless him with the blessing of Abraham, being the spiritual heir of the family of monotheism. She understands that Esav is not the one for this blessing. So why she deceives him is another question. Why can't she communicate is another question. But the reality is that she therefore intervenes and says, go, just trick your father because you get that blessing. We cannot allow the spiritual blessing to be taken by Esav because that will be a dead end. That will end the Abraham's legacy and Abraham's family, Abraham's spiritual mission on earth. That is a very beautiful, that is very logical, because you see that in the beginning, he does not give him the blessing of Abraham. He doesn't give this guy the blessing of Abraham. He just says, do with the heaven, fat of the land, let nations serve you, let your brothers serve you. So basically, it's one big misunderstanding. And that's why later Jacob is not so upset. Isaac is not necessarily upset, and it's not so hard to understand why he gives him the blessing of Abraham, because he intended to do that all along. So again, does this solve all the problems of the verse? No, but we're starting with the difference between the perspective of Rebecca and Isaac. That's one interpretation. Why did it have to happen this way is another story. We'll talk about that later. But that's the first interpretation. I'm not in love with this interpretation, but I'll go with the mystical interpretation, which basically doesn't build off it because it was written before, but it has a lot of similarities. The mystical interpretation says that the difference between Isaac and Rebecca was not a misunderstanding. It was a profound debate and difference. And that is that Isaac wanted to bless Esav with the physical blessings of wealth and power and might, and he wanted to give Jacob the blessings of spiritual blessings, the blessings of the blessing of Abraham, which is the spiritual legacy. So in that, both interpretations are the same. The thing is, it was not a misunderstanding. Rebecca knew this, but she had a philosophical disagreement with Isaac. Isaac was a spiritual person. He was introverted. He wasn't out in the world, invested in the physical reality. So Isaac feels that there should be a separation between the physical blessing and a spiritual blessing. He thinks it's preferred that two separate sons each one have their own domain. Let one son be in charge of the bank account, be in charge of the family wealth, and let the other son just be involved in spiritual ideas. And maybe they'll have some sort of partnership, they'll support each other, okay. And that's the preferred outcome. And that's why, just like the first interpretation, he says, yes, he wanted to bless Esau only with the physical blessing, and he wanted to bless Jacob with the spiritual blessing. And that's, by the way, it's very clear in the verse, because the proof of that is profound. Because when he blesses the first time, he doesn't say the blessing of Abraham. He doesn't say, I'm giving you the blessing of Abraham. He only says it to Jacob later. So both interpretations, second interpretation as well, agrees that Isaac never intended to give Esau the spiritual blessing. The only thing is, while the first interpretation says Rebecca missed this, second interpretation says no, this is a Hasidic interpretation. This Hasidic interpretation says Rebecca didn't miss it. Rebecca understood this very well. That Isaac says it's preferred to divide the physical and the spiritual, because why burden the spiritual person with the blessings so that you should have a lot of grain in your field? What does that mean? That means it's going to take you away from your spiritual pursuits. Better you sit in yeshiva, better you go to the field and live happily ever after. And that's Isaac's philosophy. And Rebecca disagrees. Now, why does she disagree? Because they had one or 2 points. Either she could say, Esau is not up for it. Esau is not up to he won't take the blessing to support spirituality. He'll take the blessing for his own needs. That's one option. Another option, they're not mutually exclusive. Another option, she says, no, it's much deeper than just a technicality. Esau is not up for the deal, but that's not the vision of Judaism. The vision of Judaism is not a separation between physical and spiritual. The same person has to be burdened both, or blessed or burdened. Both has to have the responsibility of the blessing of Abraham, the devotion to spirituality, and that same person has to be devoted to the material world. Because if you separate the two, then there's a very deep problem with materialism not influenced by spirituality. And just as big of a problem is spirituality that's not applied in the material world, right? You have too much of a division between physical and spiritual, and that's the opposite of what Judaism stands for. So both of these interpretations, to summarize, both of these interpretations believe that Isaac never intended to give Esau the blessing of Abraham. And that's also supported by the fact, how much was Isaac deceived by Esau to begin with, right? Esau, he loved his son because his son, he thought his son is a great guy. But as soon as his son says the name of Hashem, he says, oh no, you're not Esau. But didn't they tell us when we were in kindergarten that Esau tricked his father? We said it in the Rashi, that he brought, so Isaac loved Esau because game was in his mouth. We said there are 2 interpretations, either because he brought him food, he brought him the game, or because he tricked him and presented himself as pious. Well, how tricked was he if just mention the mentioning the name of God is a trigger? This is not Esau. But according to this interpretation, it fits very well, because yes, he knew he wasn't spiritual. They never planned to give him the spiritual blessing to begin with. And again, but there is, the question is, was it just a mistake? Was it just a misunderstanding? Rebecca misunderstood the whole thing, messed the whole thing up. If she did nothing, we would be better off, because then they would have 2 brothers, one would get physical, one was spiritual, and they live happily ever after. That's the first interpretation. It was all one big mistake. Or the second interpretation, the Hasidic interpretation, says no, there would be a very big problem if it was divided in that way, because Esau is not capable of using the physical in the proper way without the input of Jacob, but Esau wasn't ready to receive the input from Jacob at that point. So therefore, therefore, Jacob has no choice but to take both. I'm sorry, either because Esau is not up for it, or because the ideal, that wouldn't be the ideal. The ideal is you have to have, both have to come together, because the physical has to influence the spiritual. I'm sorry, the spiritual has to influence the physical has to be influenced by the spiritual, and the spiritual cannot be in the abstract. It has to be applied into the physical world. Otherwise it's not Judaism. So that's just getting our feet wet, not solving all the problems, but I think that it is broadening the discussion. You see here, there's a philosophical difference between Isaac and Rebekah. It's not just who we're going to love more, but it's a very interesting question. Should the blessing of the physical and spiritual be divided to two children, or should it be in one person? And Rebekah's perspective is if it can't both go to Esav, which both parents would agree Esav can't get both, so then one has to go, they both have to go to Jacob.
But
A lot more to talk about. Go ahead, Neil.
so, as all of us are parents in this room, isn't this story also very upsetting that at the end of the story, if you look at the view from 10,000 feet, the two brothers now will hate each other and be separated by 20 years. It was a gigantic story to separate the brothers.
Yes.
Like you're talking about the union of the two brothers, that one will learn from the other.
Yeah.
One complements the other,
Yeah.
but just the opposite happens.
Yeah, the
They
opposite.
never actually reconcile in their lifetimes.
It doesn't fully reconcile. They have the moment where they meet, and then they live separately. They part. Yes, and historically, certainly we don't get along. Edom and Israel don't get along. So is this a tragic story? The answer is yes. The question is, what if? What if it was done differently? I don't know. But at least from the first perspective says, if it was done differently, it would be in messianic times, everything would be peace and harmony in the family. Think about this. You want to start tracking back, you're going to see there'll be no exile to Egypt, because I already discussed this, that in the past, that ultimately the Jewish people end up in Egypt because Joseph was sold to Egypt. Why was Joseph sold to Egypt? Because of the animosity and the jealousy. Why was the jealousy? Because there was the two sisters, because Rebekah, really the children of Leah, again, were jealous of the children of Rachel. Why was it deception? Why were the two sisters? Why did he marry two sisters? Because of the deception of Laban. Why did he have to run away to Laban? Because he deceived his father. Right? So you can track the entire downfall and going to Egypt all to this story. So the argument would be, what if Jacob did not steal the blessings, and if Esav would get the blessing for the material world, and Jacob would get the blessing for spiritual world, everything would be fine, peace and harmony. That's really the first perspective. The second perspective says no, that would be impossible, because there would be no continuum to the legacy of Abraham, because the legacy of Abraham is cannot be divorced from the physical.
But don't they actually reconcile later on in Jewish history, in the sense that King David is a redhead? He has the voice of Jacob and the arms of Esau.
So certainly from the mystical perspective, Esav has to be brought back into the fold, and Esav has to be elevated. And we could talk about this later. Tohu and Tikkun, order and chaos. Jacob is order. Esav is chaos. We'll talk about this not today, because it's already 10:23. But the question is, could Esav be elevated directly? Could Esav elevate himself, or does he need Jacob to elevate him? That's also part of the debate between Rebekah and Esav. They both sense that Esav has tremendous potential. He's wild. He's wild. He's not disciplined in the sense. He's not disciplined, but he has a tremendous amount of energy. And the question is, how do you channel that energy? Could you channel the energy? Empowering him directly, would that create? He's a force of chaos. Now, force of chaos could be for the good or for the bad. It could be channeled for the good. The question is, when you have chaos, do you empower the chaos, or do you empower the order and hope that the order will figure out how to channel the chaos? So that's the same thing in mystical terms. So yes, we need Esav. The question is could Esav be blessed directly, or is that just going to empower more chaos? But you raise an interesting point, that the fallout of the story is that the brothers cannot have a decent relationship, and that's part of the tragedy. Now the question is, what if they would not do it this way? Then that we wouldn't have that problem, but we may have other problems. But you're right. That's the problem. That's a tragic story. There's no question about that. Go ahead, Vicky.
Thank you, Rabbi. Actually, I raised my hand after the Hasidic interpretation, before Neil's question, and that was because it kind of supports the idea that I had at the beginning, that Rebecca kind of sensed that the best solution would be to join the blessings,
Right.
and give them to to the older brother, to Jacob, but to the younger brother. But she had problem explaining that to her husband directly, because she probably knew that it wasn't possible for her to go that route. So that kind of supports that interpretation. So at the end, when Isaac sensed what happened, he was shaken because how come we didn't get along, and she couldn't explain. Maybe that's why, but that's going into the psychology. But then my second question is about Neil's question about what if. So if Hashem lets something happen, does it mean that that's the only route, or something else could have happened, or that could be that could have happened differently?
I don't do what ifs, but I would say what is the benefit of happening this way? In other words, maybe God wanted the Jews to be in Egypt.
Right.
Maybe God wanted the Jews to be in Egypt. Maybe this family has to be torn up before it can be reconciled. I don't know.
So if that happened, in fact happened, and it's recorded in Torah, kind of, so Hashem wanted that to happen that way. That's what I'm saying.
There is an advantage that it happened this way. Could it happen another way? Yes. Is there advantage to each way? Yes. Let's assume the same event could happen in two ways, the hard way or the easy way, right? So from my perspective, it could have happened both ways. The easy way, the good way, has certain advantages. The hard way, the difficult way, has many challenges. But this is the Hasidic idea. But there's always an advantage. They each have an advantage. There's an advantage to go through the suffering. Forget about this whole book. Let's go back to the first story. Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. What happens if they wouldn't? Well, the downside is we wouldn't have what to talk about, because there would be no 5 books of Moses. In other words, Mashiach comes, we're done. In other words, we're done. So the world is perfect. So very nice. Right? What are we trying to get? We're going to have 6,000 years of human history. What are we going to get? We're going to get the world is perfect. We're going to go back to Garden of Eden, or we're going to expand Garden of Eden to the rest of the world. So there's 2 ways to get there. You can get there immediately, the easy way, or you can get there the long way. It may take 6,000 years, but you get to the long result. So which one is better? What's the answer? They each have an advantage. If it happened this way, probably these advantages outweigh the other advantages.
Thank you, Rabbi. That was a beautiful answer, and expanded it way beyond what I. Thank you.
Okay, 3 minutes left. I want to just talk about a minute or two. What do I want to talk about for the minute or two? I want to talk about a minute or two. What did Isaac realize? He gets this awakening. He's shocked. He's frightened. And he says, he trembles a great trembling, and he said, let him be blessed. So all of a sudden, and let him be blessed. So all of a sudden, he was enlightened. In other words, he was enlightened. In other words, and you're like in the dark, and all of a sudden you have one piece of information and changes your perspective entirely. So what shifted? So I'm going to give 2 interpretations. I'm not saying this solves the problems of the story. It just adds another dimension. I'm not saying, again, I'm not here to answer the problems of the story. The morality question, I'm not here to answer. I already answered it. I said it's a morally problematic story. The Jacob suffers because of this. But let's see what happens here in the story. So I'm going to give 2 perspectives. One perspective is from Shamshin Fal Hirsch. This is the first one. This is actually very interesting. It's interesting to think about. I'm not saying it's convincing or good, but it's an interesting perspective. And from Shamshin Fal Hirsch's perspective, and this is really a defense for Rebecca and for Isaac. So he's defending Rebecca and Isaac, and it's a very interesting story. It's not going to solve all your problems. It's not going to take away the moral problem entirely, but it's actually fascinating to consider. So what does Shamshin Fal Hirsch says? He says this whole thing is a mistake. What's the mistake? Rebecca never tried to trick Isaac. It's ridiculous. How you could trick Isaac? Could you present yourself as your brother, put on some goat skin and say, I'm a hairy guy? This is ridiculous. This whole thing is ridiculous. How could you trick your husband? How could one brother trick the father about who the brother is, even if he can't see? Even if he can't see, at a minimum, you see that he realized it was a problem. Now let me ask you, what would you do if you're Isaac? If you want to bless Esav, And then you have a son who's before you. And his hands, like Isaac says, the hands are the hands of Esav, are the voice of Jacob. What do? Call somebody to find out. You know there's a problem. There's a red flag. He ignores the red flag. So this is an absurd story. How Isaac is being tricked is an absurdity. Says Rabbi Shamshin here. She says that's exactly the point. Rebecca never tried to trick Isaac. What she tried to show him is everybody's trying to trick you. Look how easy it is to trick you. One second, let me know. One second. So what is she saying? What does she want? She wants to say, son is tricking me. She wants him to get that option in his head. And then what does she want him to, what's the next step? Is only one of my sons tricking me? Or is my other son also tricking me? And then if my other son is also tricking me, then I have to rethink everything. I have to rethink everything I think about my sons. I have to realize, stop being so gullible. Maybe people are presenting something that they're not. That's Shamshin Falash here. Why is he doing that? He's doing it to defend Rebecca, no question about it. That she never really tried to trick him. She just tried to show him people are trying to trick you. Without telling you, you're so gullible. How do you tell someone you're so gullible? You send your kid with some goat skins on his ear. I'm not sure I'm convinced by this interpretation. But what I do see here is, where I will take it to, is when he realized he was tricked, then he realizes, maybe that I'm very comfortable saying it at that point, then he realizes that something is happening. I'm not seeing the full picture. So Esav is not Jacob is not who he presents himself to be. Esav is not who he represents himself to be. I have to rethink everything. So the lightning, so I'm not going to defend, the problem with Shamshin Fal Hirsch's interpretation, it's a beautiful interpretation defending Rebecca. But it's not such an easy interpretation, because when you read the verses, it seems very clear that she wants to get the blessings, because she wants Jacob to trick his father. Because otherwise, when Jacob said, what's going to be if my father touches me and he'll know I'm Esav and he'll curse me, what should he have said? Don't worry, he's not going to realize who you are. She says, no, the curse will be upon me. Okay. Putting that aside for a second, I don't want to get into the details too much. The bottom line is, you could or could not like Shamshin Fal Hirsch's interpretation that Rebecca never thought he would get it, but I'm not taking it that far. I'm saying he realizes he was tricked, so he was frightened. What is he frightened about? That he was tricked? No, he was frightened, and now he has to rethink everything. Now he says, people trick me. So what else don't I know? That's a frightening thought. That's a frightening thought, right? So that's more comfortable. Forget about Rebecca. He's doing it to friend Rebecca.
He raises his eyes just like Abraham does.
He raises his eyes and he says, there's a new reality here. What's the new reality? Nothing is the same. Once he's tricked, nothing is the same. Now he has to rethink everything. And again, it doesn't have to take a lot of time, because remember, what's interpretation? All the facts are before you, but your interpretation of those facts are one. And then when you realize that your interpretation is wrong, then all those facts translate otherwise. Right? That's the way people make mistakes. In other words, it's not that you have more information. You just need one little piece of information to make everything switch in your brain. So once he realizes that he's being tricked, and so he questions who else is tricking him, then he realizes that according to this interpretation, then he realizes that Gam Baruch Yeh, you know what? Let him keep the blessing, because the story is much more complicated than my simplistic view. That Esav is a good recipient for this blessing. Forget about worthy or not. That's one interpretation. That went 3 minutes early over, and we need one more minute. One more minute is like this. What does the Sfas Emes say? Oh, this is the Sfas Emes. You could take it or not. This is a Hasidic interpretation. It goes like this. It goes like this. Why does Esav? Why? The premise of this question is Isaac such a fool that Esav can trick him and represent himself as righteous and trick him to the extent that he wants to bless him? So what the Sfas Emes says, the Hasidic interpretation, he says like this. He says, Isaac, sometimes your kids try to trick you and you go along with it. That's what's happening here. Isaac knows that Esav is trying to trick him. Very good. That's why
Jacob or Isaac?
Isaac knows that Esav is trying to, all along, that Esav presents himself as righteous even though he's not.
Oh, yeah, okay.
He knows that all along. That's exactly why he wants to bless him. Because he understands. This is to Vicky, overlaps to Vicky's point earlier about what did Jacob. He understands that if you want to survive in this world, you can't be just a gullible person. You can't be a person that's morally straightforward and someone who's never going to lie and no one's going to deceive. It's a wonderful trait to be morally perfect. But if you're going to be morally perfect, you're never going to survive. You have to sometimes engage in deception if you want to survive. That's what he understands. So he says, if we're going to put if you're Isaac and you have 3,000 years of Jewish history ahead, you have to get we have to create this company that's going to last a long time. So are you going to bless the guy who cannot deceive, or the guy who could deceive? Who would you bless? If you bless the guy who cannot deceive, there's a non-starter. You're not going to get off the ground. The moment he sees that Jacob could deceive him, he says, wonderful, keep the blessing.
It's not a bug, it's a feature.
It's not a bug, it's a feature. Again, none of these interpretations solve the problem, the moral problem, which is a moral problem, which means even if you think it's the right thing to do, could you lie? And we'll deal with the lies later. Let's save the lies for next week. Again, I'm not going to solve it, but there is a very big lie that we have to deal with when Isaac says, I am Esav, your firstborn. When Jacob says, he says a phrase, Anochi Esav becharecha, I am Esav, your firstborn. Okay, if there was ever a lie in the Torah, an explicit lie, it may be that. And here you have the sages jumping through the hoops. So at least three interpretations how to explain that sentence. Was it an outright lie? Was it not a lie? Was it partial lie? Was it a white lie? The point is, we're not solving that problem. That's not why we gathered here today. But what we're trying to get at, what are the players? What is the state of mind of the players here today? So we began with the big division between Isaac and Rebekah. That Isaac wanted to bless. And this, I think, is clear in the verses. Once you hear it, you can't go back. This is one interpretation. You can't go back. You have to understand that Isaac never meant to give Esau the blessing of Abraham. That's I don't think there's any other way of reading the verse, because he saves it to the end. He doesn't give it to the guy who thinks is Esau. He doesn't say, doesn't say, I'm giving you the blessing of Abraham or the land. Doesn't say any of that. He just says, fat of the land, do it, fat of the sky, do of the heaven, fat of the land. Doesn't even say which land. Okay. So then we can't go back. So again, just to summarize quickly, we said it's clear that he wanted to divide the two. Either Rebekah missed that point, and if she would have known, she wouldn't intervene because Jacob's getting the spiritual blessing, or specifically, no, she intervened because she understood they have to be together with one person, because giving Esau more physical blessing when he's still in the state of chaos is not going to help him. It's going to make him worse. Right? Your kid's making trouble throwing out of school. What are you going to do? You're going to give him a credit card? In other words, it's not the point. Yeah, later we have to get them. We have to bring him back and we have to give him blessing. But the question is, giving him blessing when he's in the state of chaos is going to make it worse. That's Rebekah's perspective. The second perspective again is that you want them both together. That you have to have both together, and only Jacob could refine Esau. Then we got to the question of what happened when Jacob realizes that he was deceived. So either when Isaac realizes he was deceived, either he realizes that everybody's deceiving me, so I have to rethink everything, and therefore all the facts that he had now are reinterpreted, and he gets to a different result. And he says, Gam Baruch, I'm giving a different result because now I understand. It's not that I've been deceived and I have to look at the facts differently. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation is he realizes that Jacob could deceive, and therefore now he wants to bless him. The problem, to be honest, the problem with that deception, the problem with that interpretation, and the reason why I think the first interpretation is actually a little bit better, is because he's frightened. He's so frightened. According to the second interpretation, he's happy. Oh, now Jacob could deceive. Now everything will be fine. He's frightened. I think the first interpretation is nicer. He's frightened, not so much that I was deceived now. He's frightened by where else was I deceived? They say you have an earthquake, and then it's very hard. It's psychologically, it's very difficult because now nothing is stable. Psychologically, you're walking on the earth. You think the earth is stable. Once you experience an earthquake, now your mind tells you what I have nothing to step on. So if you were deceived so badly, now you say, so I have to question everything. And questioning everything is a frightening prospect. And that's why he's so frightened. He's so frightened because he has to question everything. Okay. We have exactly 6 minutes left for questions. And any other questions we save for next week. Thank you all for joining. Wonderful, wonderful sukkahs. Just a little bit of programming. I forgot what I wrote in the email. So there's no class on Tuesday, which is the holiday. I think we said, I don't know what I wrote in the email. Thursday will be in the sukkah if you want to come join, otherwise on Zoom. And then I don't remember what I wrote.
You wrote on Friday, there's going to be.
And
Friday,
then Tanya class,
Wednesday,
and the
no
Tanya
class.
class, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Yes. Okay. 5 minutes left. All other questions will have to be next week. Go ahead, Bob, go ahead.
Thank you, Rabbi, but I think Vicky was ahead of me.
Vicky, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. I just wanted to offer the kind of a mixed feeling interpretation of why he was shaken, because the first, even if he understood that it's okay that the younger one is tricking him, it's okay, but he has a communication problem with the family. That's enough for him to be shaken about it. So his wife needed to trick him in order to get her point across. So that kind of a mix.
Right in that I have an environment where they can't talk to me.
Right.
Okay.
Mix the two together, and that may explain, because it's not all black and white either or. Thank you.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Toda rabah. Thank you. Go ahead, Bob.
Another potential interpretation of the trembling. Maybe it's this point where Isaac understands that God can be in the weeds as well. He thought this was, just a man-to-man problem, but suddenly something happens. He has an aha moment. He shudders with the realization that Hashem, in the phrase Gamze Tova,
Right.
and it's a great moral story about how Jews should be resilient and pivot to
Right.
things that they didn't expect, but that this may lead to a better moment.
So
And
that's
that's what
very
I
good.
meant before when I meant, there is a point A to B, but it's the zigzagging. The devil is in the details. And to know that Hashem lives with us in the weeds from time to time, and even though we expect A, we end up with B, it's kind of a telling moment. And it's
Right. So I want to elaborate upon that next week, because I think it's a great point, and I think there's a lot. The commentaries address this point in the sense that from God, why did God orchestrate that Jacob should get his blessing through deception? Why is that a better result? Forget about God orchestrated. Forget about who orchestrated. There's a theory. There's a perspective that the sages try to explain. Let's say Jacob, there's an advantage that Jacob got his blessing from Isaac without Isaac knowing he's blessing Jacob. They're looking for that. There's a genre of commentaries that want to address this point. How they address that point is another question. We'll get to that next week. But I think that overlaps with Bob's point, and that is, I have my plan. I'm Isaac. I have my plan. I want to bless Jacob. And then I realize something else happened. And then I have the humility to realize that may have been God's plan. So I can pivot in the same verse, be both frightened that my plan crashed, and in the same verse, pivot and say, you know what, let him be blessed, because that was God's plan. So that's
exactly.
I think that the abruptness of the change, I think that's what you're saying, Bob, and I agree with you. I think the way you're saying is beautiful. The fact that it's so abrupt. He's frightened and immediately says, let him be blessed. You would lose it if it would be in two different verses. You would lose this point where he's recognized as the humility that I had a plan, my plan failed, but God has his own plan. Let's follow God's plan. And the only way to do that literary is to put it in the same verse. He's frightened. And you think, I don't know, he's going to curse, he's going to get upset, because everyone thinks he's going to curse, by the way. Jacob says, my father's going to realize he's going to curse me. Rebecca says, your curse will be upon me. Everyone, you expect to curse. If you just read the verses, you expect he should curse. That's what he do. What he does. Instead, in that same verse where he's frightened, he says, let him be blessed. So you see that ability to say, okay, my plan didn't work, but let God's plan work. I think that's beautiful.
Which reveals the greatness of Isaac as opposed to his weakness, because most people think he was the weak patriarch, but in the moment that in one verse he could pivot that quickly,
right. That's great.
Is tremendous.
I have to write it down. I have to write this down in my notes, so I have it next year, and that's good. Yeah, that's good.
It also connects him back to King David when he's accused by Bathsheba.
Yeah. So very quickly, yeah. So Neil keeps taking us back to King David, because King David has a lot of similarities to Jacob and Asaph combined. He's redhead like Asaph. He's a warrior like Asaph, but he's also a very broken spiritual poet like Jacob. So he's got both. So Neil says that David, when he sins with Bathsheba and the prophet Nathan speaks to him, very quickly when he realizes it was a mistake and he sinned, very quickly he pivots and he takes responsibility and he shifts his entire approach very quickly.
So does Judah with Tamar.
Judah and Tamar in a moment that yeah, there's a moment of truth where things shift. But to when somebody, and this is beautiful, I keep thinking about this, when somebody has a plan, when your plan fails, what is your response? And one response would be to be upset, and you could be frightened, but you have to embrace it, and that's what Jacob does.
Jacob,
That's what Isaac does. Gam Baruch Yeh, immediately in the same verse,
because he's got a genius in him.
because he's got a genius or faith, maybe it's faith. Because I don't think it's a rational process. I think he's too frightened to start thinking rationally. I think he falls back on his faith. So it's almost like I don't want to say surrender to faith, but it's like recognizing the limitation of your ability to orchestrate reality.
Or
You know,
Gevura.
anger. What is anger? Anger is most people get angry. I think anger is we think we're in control, and when something happens that we're not in control, we're upset because we thought we were in control. But somebody who has humility realizes I was never in control to begin with. Then when something doesn't go my way, the response is not curse. The response is acceptance or pivoting or saying he's blessed because he never felt he was in control to begin with. Okay, but that's beyond the scope. A lot to do today. We got to build the sukkah. We have a lot to do. Gevura, strength is discipline. So they'll be able to yeah, that's good. Toda rabah. Thank you, everybody. And God willing, the discussion continues.
Yasha Kol
Thank
Rebbe.
you. Yashikach.